I just bought my first house. I was in the house all weekend cleaning, scrubbing floors, raking leaves and getting it move-in ready. I left Sunday night around 4:30 p.m. with the whole place in pristine condition. On Monday, at 8 a.m. my movers arrived to my apartment to load up everything to move to the new house. I took some personal items and headed over for a drop-off by myself. I entered the house and rushed upstairs, taking toiletries to the bathroom. On my way down, I began realizing that I could smell an awful smell that was like a mix of urine and cigarettes. When I left the house on Sunday, the entire house smelled like Clorox. I knew something was wrong. I realized someone had been in the house the night before, after I left from a long day of cleaning. I thought to check upstairs while I was up there for trash or damages. So I took a moment to check all the upstairs rooms and closets. As I went back downstairs, I then realized my living room window had been pushed in from the top and was hanging off the windowsill. At that moment, I decided to go back outside and call the cops. I walked down the hall to the back door into the garage where I came in. I saw light coming from under the basement door under the stairs. I opened it and called down, "Is anyone down there?" Silence. I repeated it. No response. I looked down deeper at a different angel and saw a leg scurry out of my viewpoint. I slammed the door shut and barricaded it by using the adjacent back entrance door, opening it so it blocks the basement door from opening. Then I heard someone barreling up the stairs and aggressively trying to get through the door. We had a push and shove and he was cursing and threatening me. I got my phone out to call the cops. I fought the door back and forth with him, going from threatening to begging to reasoning, etc., but I was terrified and I wasn't listening to a word. All I cared about was making sure this person did not get through that door. The cops arrived, took over. I went out to my car while they did whatever they were doing with him. 20 minutes later or so they came out and I finally saw what the guy looks like. Someone who hasn't seen a sober day in 10 years probably. He cussed at me as they walked him to the car. The next 2 hours were spent with the cops taking evidence all over the house, cigarette butts, heroin in the basement, handprints on all the windows, assessing damages, etc., and asking questions. While all this was going on, I checked my mail. And there was a note on top of my mailbox addressed to someone named Jamie about how to get into the house. It threw us all off that we have the same name and we all thought it was addressed to me at first. But then we realized it was a coincidence. After 2 hours, the cops took all the evidence and I was alone in the house again. My realtor asked me to take some pictures of the basement situation. Reluctantly, I went down. As I was taking pictures, I saw something in the corner of my eye. It was a hand sliding into the shadows underneath the furnace. I ran up the stairs, barricaded the door and called the police again. They came and arrested the second person who was hiding in my basement in a very small, seemingly impossible, gap between the furnace and wall. This person turned out to be female. My mind never thought or cared about whether they were male or female, strong or weak, or someone I could overpower. I never saw them at all, other than quick glimpses of body parts in shadows, at least not until they were arrested. All I could think about is the fact that there are intruders in my home and I didn't know who or why. So all I cared about was making sure they did not get through that door. The two people that invaded my house are John and Jamie. Both with a criminal history. Both have been charged with burglary, criminal mischief, and bail and probation violations, as well as destruction of property. I now understand why they were there. And likely could have been harmless, as many people love to tell me, and that they were just looking for an empty place to get high and do what they do. But that doesn't erase the fear and traumatic experience of realizing you are not alone in your home and having someone violently fight you through a door and threaten you that you cannot see. If there is one place you should always feel safe, it's in your home. I bought a house that I wanted to make some cosmetic changes to, and I had a contractor tell me it was no problem. In the process of knocking a wall out, we discover the rafters are disintegrating and eaten alive by termites. The whole ceiling needs to be replaced. That cost about $6,000, which was not accounted for in the budget, and no one will ever see or know it was all replaced. That's fixed, but we just continue to run into problems every step of the way, like shoddy electric work, questionable handyman fixes, and corners were cut on just about everything. A few months in and my boyfriend and I separate, so now I have all these bills to take on myself. I could afford the house alone and purchased it myself, but it really sucks thinking you're going to be splitting the mortgage and now suddenly you're not. I'm really just going through it in my personal life, so my mom comes to stay with me. We do not get along, and trying to do projects around the house with someone you don't get along with is truly a living nightmare. Anyway, she finally leaves after staying with me for 5 weeks, and I'm so excited just to get home and decompress and finally be alone. I get home from dropping her off at the airport and the power is out. I go to flip the breakers and that doesn't fix anything. I'm freaking out because it's already 80 degrees in my house without the AC and I have pets. I call an emergency electrician and he says it'll be $700 just to drive to my house. Not even to do any diagnostic. Naturally, I start bawling and he offers to help me over the phone. Long story short, I discover the house is underpowered and I need to have the whole breaker replaced. I can't even remember all of the other things that have happened in the first few months of owning this piece of shit, but just about everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. It's been nightmare after nightmare with this house, but it's mine and I'm doing it on my own and it'll be worth it. Eventually. My grandparents bought an old beautiful stone house about a decade ago. It sat on a hill overlooking a lake and had this crawling ivy up alongside the front of the house. There was a long winding driveway through some woods to get to the house, and every time we would visit it would feel like the beginning of the horror movie where the family pulls up to the remote ghost mansion and you just know that shit is about to go down. So we're helping move everything in, and my brother and I are messing around upstairs around this old bookcase built into the wall. I notice a small latch on the bookcase and I pull it down, opening the bookcase. At the time, this was by far the coolest thing that had ever happened to us. We found a secret room behind a bookcase. So we crawl through this little passageway and it leads to a tiny room that had a small cot, some clothes scattered around, and a couple of dishes. It seemed like someone was actively living in the house. There were cobwebs all over, but there was a sense that someone was living there. We run downstairs and tell our parents, who aren't in the mood to hear ghost stories from 2 kids, so they ignore us and tell us that it was probably an old servant's quarters. Well, it turned out someone had been living in the house. They left while everyone was moving in, and for some reason they tried to break back in that night. The house had been empty for a couple of years and this guy figured this out and was living in it. I never felt so justified in my life. This isn't exactly creepy, but still a bit odd. Shortly after moving into an old terraced Victorian house in London in 2004, I decided to check out the 3 tiny attics in the house. They were only a few feet wide and in length too, from what I could make out. All seemed normal and empty except for one of the attics, which was just outside my son's bedroom. As I slid my hand to search for anything on the surface of the attic, I found a greeting card, can't remember exactly which type. Could have been Christmas card but not 100% sure. It had the most inexplicable handwriting I had ever seen, and as an admin worker I have seen bad handwriting, but you can usually tell the odd few letters / figures or words. The handwriting on this card was too unreadable, literally, and I also found it odd that it was placed and left in an attic, whereas the rest of the house, except for the cellar, was empty. I left the card exactly where I found it and closed the attic. Thought it best left alone, but I still wonder about that card sometimes. I don't remember ever opening that attic door or touching that card again. My son used to say he never liked sleeping in his room and that he found it creepy. He spent many nights coming to sleep by my side because he felt too scared to sleep there all night. In 2011, I was told by a friend, clairvoyant, who spent couple of nights at my house that the house was active with protective and curious presences, but they weren't bad ones. There were other little things that occurred over the years, but this was one of those notable ones in relation to the question. To me, the house was interesting and charming but never felt any threats there. I lived there for over 8 years before moving out. This isn't a house I moved into, rather the people that moved in after me. One Saturday night in the lulls of winter, my fiancé and I were having a quiet evening in our new home. I had just moved from my parents' house a few weeks prior. We were starting to drift off when my phone rang. It was my brother. He still lived at my parents' home. I silenced it and figured I'd call him back the next day. It immediately rang again, so I answered, and his friend was on the other line. She said, "I'm really sorry to have to tell you this, your dad killed himself." What? WTF happened? Is he at the hospital? He shot himself. John, not my brother's real name, and I were at dinner and I dropped him off and he found him. You should hurry there. I got there to discover my dad had got up onto the banister overhanging the foyer, put a noose around his neck, put a shotgun in his mouth and pulled the trigger. My brother walked in the front door to find his body hanging, the back of his head missing. He immediately tried to cut him down, and when he did, his body fell on top of my brother, and what was left of his brains slid out onto bro's chest. When I got there, my brother was covered in blood and in total shock. My dad's body was crumpled on the floor with a stream of blood and brains from his head. The walls and ceiling were covered in blood-splatter pieces of brain. Fast forward about 3 weeks, after the biohazard crew were finished cleaning and we could get back inside to clear his stuff out and sell the house. Large sections of drywall were missing, or scraped to the bare surface by the cleaners. There were several holes in the walls and ceiling where it looked like shot from the shotgun shell had spread out. The section of the wood floor in the foyer where his body came to rest had been cut and removed, almost resembling a chalk line that had been cut from the floor. There was a visible gouge in the wooden banister where the rope had rested against. As I slowly looked around in disbelief, completely numb, I opened the coat closet in the foyer, and a piece of his skull a couple inches across was there, must have slid under the door and was missed by the cleaners. And the odor, flesh or anything. Just very strange, very organic but also caustic chemical smell. Nauseating without comparison. I had glimpses play over in my mind like you see in a horror movie, where it rapidly alternates between the clean, before, and the bloody, after, with a haunting shrieking noise. We emptied the house of his things and turned the title over to a liquidation company, and it was sold within days. We were close with our neighbors, and they knew what happened. So I can't imagine the new owners remained oblivious indefinitely. But I honestly have no idea.